Hello and welcome to South Africa on 99.94. I'm Neil Manthorpe and my co-host is Lungani Zama. In this episode, we're going to be talking about, it's still 10 days or so before the first test match, but we're going to be talking about the Proteas in Australia. It's a massive series. Just some background for those of you who don't know, some little bit of history. South Africa waited 98 years for their first series win in Australia before they finally achieved it in 2008. And then, like London buses, 3 came along in a row. They won again in 2012 and again in 2016. And I must say that I didn't foresee any of them. I was full of optimism from the very first post-isolation tour to Australia in 1994. I went on all of them, and every single time I said to myself, this time it'll be different, this time it'll be different. But I didn't see 2008 coming. 2012 was a brilliant, brilliant team. So I must say that having won in 2008, I thought 2012, I mean, that was just, they were the number one team in the world. So I shouldn't have been surprised, but yeah, they did it the hard way. And then 2016 was the easiest of the 3 series wins. This time, Zams, just like in the last episode, I'm in a positive mood. So the first question to you is, just use your imagination, think out the box. How can South Africa win this time? Without a single batsman averaging over 38, which is Dean Elgar's average, Kagiso Rabada's 250 test wickets. He is a proven match winner. There's fantastic potential amongst the others, but I don't think anybody other than Kagiso Rabada would compete for a place in any of the other test teams, England's test team or Australia's test team. So how can they win?
With a fair bit of luck. I remember Glenn McGrath stepping on a ball on the morning of the Lord's Test match in the 2005 series, and that was a trigger to set England on their way. It's going to need some luck because cheapers. It's not so much that 11 on 11 South Africa can't compete. It's just how low the confidence reserves are at the moment. And then you look the other day and you see Manus Labuschagne, or Labuschagne, as they say on that side, is rattling off double centuries. Steve Smith is in ominous form. They've just discovered some other guy who bowls 150 plus. Everything points to a massacre. It's an incredibly tough ask. They will have to bat unbelievably well, put up JP Dooman. It's a big ask, big ask.
Right. So basically, the way South Africa have been winning test matches in the last 2 years is by bowling teams out cheaply. They haven't scored runs in the sort of sufficient or the kind of quantities that you would normally associate with test match winning performances. They've put 400 on the board once again in the second test against New Zealand, but they've only got a couple of hundreds in the last couple of years. So what they're going to have to do is bowl Australia out for 250 or less, which, as you say, is hard to imagine.
If you look at it, to bowl that Australian batting card out for under 300 on at least 3 occasions is someone's going to have to bowl really, really, really well. And it's not as if they've got a problem facing pace. It's not as if they facing left armers is something that doesn't come naturally because they've got one of the best ones in the world in their team. Everything is stacked up against South Africa. It feels like we're back in the 90s when you're going there and you eyes closed and really hoping for the best. But, people are going to wake up on Boxing Day in South Africa to 80 for 6 or Australia 320 for 1 kind of thing. There's a real sense of dread. Someone is going to have to play out of their boots to have a prayer.
Well, a couple are going to have to. Actually, and I'm going to ask you about we'll start with the top order, but first of all, we'll take a short break.
You're listening to Cricket's Conversation on 99.94. Whatever your team, we have the show for you on podcast, YouTube, or on the 99.94 app. We have India, England, South Africa, West Indies, and now Sri Lanka covered. If you want to find us, the best way is to follow us on social media at 9994DM by downloading the 9994 app or Google 99.94 on podcast. We speak cricket.
Right, you're talking about somebody having to play out of their boots. I think 3 or 4 players are going to have to produce career-defining performances. I mean, that's really the level that we're at. 3 or 4 players are going to have series like they've never imagined before, let alone ever produced. So let's go with the top order. Dean Elgar. I mean, he's scored hundreds against Australia in Australia. So we need to put him down for a 350 run series. Sada Lavia, and then who's going to bat 3? Tiernis de Bruin or Heinrich Klaassen?
It's a bit too high for Klaassen, so it'd have to be probably de Bruin, because I don't really see Rassie van der Dussen going that high up the order. So it probably would have to be Tiernis de Bruin.
And there's nothing about his recent form to suggest that he can have a massive impact, is there? I mean, they've gone back to experience. Keegan Peterson injured himself. He was the incumbent number 3, and promising. He was man of the series against India without scoring 100. So promising start, and he's was lots and lots of 20s and 30s, but nothing to scare Australia's bowling attack. For those who missed it, by the way, when Pat Cummins took his 200th Test wicket, that became the first Test team in history to have 4 bowlers with over 200 Test wickets: Mitchell Starc, Josh Hazlewood, Nathan Lyon, and Pat Cummins. So that in itself is a daunting prospect. So I can't see Tiernis de Bruin making a massive impact. The man you just mentioned, Rassie van der Dussen, this is the time to deliver. I mean, the guy averages almost 70, averages 69 in one-day cricket. And that's a big sample size. That's over 30 innings. He averages 69. He's a quality cricketer, but he's averaging 32 in Test cricket. But I think he does have the quality to produce a career-defining series.
He does. And the other option, before I get to Rassie, the other option at 3 would be to sort of defy convention and maybe use Aiden Markram at first drop. For a long time,
he's not there. He's not there. He didn't make the squad, remember?
In my head, when I saw him make runs, I thought it's the last hurrah before he jumps on the plane. But of course, the fact that he's making runs is they all flew on Thursday. The frustration is that he's the one player that traditionally Australians have looked at and said he looks the classiest of the lot. I mean, there were comparisons that sort of said if AB de Villiers and Jacques Kallis had a love child, it probably would bat like Aiden Markram, because he looks classy enough and he plays shots. You saw that 100 that he made against them at Kingsmead in 2018. That's what you need, authoritative, strong mind, and he's played against them. He's heard every sledge possible that Warner and everyone else behind him at slip can chuck. There's that, so it is a bit galling when you look at it and say people who've played and done well against Australia have not been picked. When you've got slim pickings, it's horrendous, really, because as much as it's a physical confrontation on the field, Australia win most of their battles at home long before you face the ball, a bold one, because they've just got in your head and media and everywhere reminding you of how useless you are, or what this person is going to do to you. It's an intimidating place. But at least if you've performed against them, you can draw on that and say, I once made 100 and shut them up for a session and a half batting with Quinny de Kock at Kingsmead. No one, outside of Dean Elgar. No one really has that in that team, and you're asking a hell of a lot of Dean Elgar then to sort of show up everything that he has to as captain, and then lead people through these seas that they've just never seen before. It's a hell of a lot.
Okay, now we move on to Temba Bavuma, as a man we've spoken a lot about in the last month or so as captain of the T20 team. Herschel Gibbs has been very forthright and unforgiving in his tweets of late. You know, saying Temba Bavuma scored 152 Test matches, and that was 5 years ago. I have just been writing previews and looking back again. I've been a massive defender of Bavuma's because if there are various indices that rate the difficulty of wickets, but you know they're very difficult to follow. Most of them, I've seen all of his Test innings. I've been there, seen it with my own eyes, and I can tell you categorically that the more difficult the pitch, the more awkward conditions, the more likely he is to score vital runs. And, you know, I mean, for 35 years, not only have I heard, but I've been saying hundreds win Test matches. Well, actually, not always. Not on the really difficult, spicy pitches, 60s and 70s. And he's scored 60s and 70s, which have won Test matches. The trouble is, there aren't going to be any spicy pitches in Australia, and he is going to have to score hundreds, and he is going to have to change that record. He averages 34 after 52 Test matches. He's got 100. That is pretty damning. But, you know, the one time where South Africa did get a seriously spicy pitch was in Hobart on the last series. And again, him and Quinton de Kock at a time when, I mean, they bowled Australia out for 85 in the first innings, but they were really under pressure in the second innings. There was a moment, 5 down, where South Africa, if they had collapsed in a heap, could have been under serious pressure, and Australia could have fought their way back into that game. But again, Bavuma and de Kock put on 150, and Bavuma made an excellent 70, and it's not the first time. In fact, he's done it lots. And just the way that England are redefining Test cricket, I'm not advocating that batsmen go out there and be satisfied with 60 or 70, but bloody hell, you know, he has scored some seriously important runs. And here's the most important statistic, I think, is that in the last 2 years of Test cricket, never mind his career average being 34, in the last two years, he's actually averaging closer to 45.
Yeah, look, I hear what you're trying to say, Manus. The problem is the words that you're using are based on survival and gritting it out and, you know, overcoming adversity. And you've answered yourself by saying they're not going to face any of those conditions in Australia now. They're going to face absolute belting wickets with pace and bounce. And it's not going to be a survival. If you're trying to survive, you might do 10 overs. The words that you want to speak about when you speak about your middle order batsman, your vice captain, are dominant, take the game away. You know, literally, when you walk to the crease, there's an air of if we don't get him early. You know, the best players that have done well in Australia from overseas teams. You look at a Lara, you look at a Michael Vaughan had that incredible series. You look at, you know, Virat Kohli. They walk out there and they take the game to Australia. If you're not doing that, it doesn't feel like you're hurting them. So even if you actually make, Jacques Kallis once made that long and slow 100 in Melbourne, everyone else was falling around him. It was a great effort individually, but it didn't take the game away from Australia so that it wasn't too big a worry. It's not runs that hurt you. The stuff that scares Australia is when you're scoring the way, like you said, England was scoring in Rawalpindi the other day, where we can't have a full session of this, and suddenly you can't have a day of this, and they've scored 500. They can't lose. They can't lose, and that's why they didn't. The only result really was in the balance when they took a gamble and said we don't have enough time to, you know, so let's give them a carrot which they might look at and say we could chase that, and they did, and fortune does favor the brave, and they ended up winning that. But you've got to take the fight to them. When Markram made those runs, he took the fight to them. When Dumini made runs at Melbourne, he took the fight to them. You can't sit idly and just say, "Oh, I'll see off Cummins," because Josh Hazlewood comes at you. "Oh, I'll see it. I'll see off the pace." Nathan Lyon comes with 400 plus wickets. Like, it's relentless. And then the bowlers come back for their second spell. Like, you can't think in that survival mode. And someone in there has to be brave enough, composed enough to play their shots and really take the fight to them. And I can't tell you who. That's why I was deluded enough to say Aidan Markram, even though he's not in the squad, because the one thing that he does is play his shots. That's one thing you know. He might make a quick 20, but he's going to play his shots, and you look at it and go, if he plays for 2 hours, we're going to be in trouble.
I was looking back, as I said, through the previous series, and the deciding test match in 2012 is an example of exactly what you were saying. I mean, South Africa somehow managed to get to the WACA, that was the third test in 2012 level, somehow. And then they were 80 odd for 5, managed with Faf du Plessis playing his second test match to make 225, which was good enough for a 62-run lead. And nobody expected. I mean, I was commentating for the ABC, which I will be again this year, and I thought there was absolutely no chance. And then with a 62-run lead, I don't know if you recall whether you were watching it or not, because I was commentating on it, and Graham Smith and Hashim Amla scored 180 in a session. 180 runs in a session. Hashim Amla, to me, that was, of course, there's the 311 not out, but he was playing shot. He was toying with the Australian bowlers. I mean, he was stepping outside off stump and flicking length deliveries over mid wicket, and then he was stepping outside leg stump and carving them over extra cover. And that was the kind of counter attack. And South Africa made over 500 and won by 300 to annihilate Australia. And as Faf du Plessis said in his book, which we talked about a couple of weeks ago, there's nothing a bully hates more than being bullied. And you look at this South African team and you think, who can do the bullying? Who can bully the bullies?
Yeah, I literally took the words out of my mouth. Hashim and Graham bullied them for a session, and it doesn't matter how strong you are and how deep your bowling reserves go. When every single guy you throw the ball at disappears, it doesn't just shake you. It forces you to take a step back and sort of question your own approach, and they just never recovered. They just never recovered. A bully thrives when you're the one taking the backward step, but when you stand up and push back and keep pushing back, it's they often don't know how to react, and if anything, they go further into their shell than you ever would, because they just don't know how. They're not, you look at Dave Warner. He's not equipped to deal with people coming at him that confrontationally, and generally he wins the confrontations because people just don't do that. But when you do it back, it shocks them. So if you look at that South African top order again, there's no Quinny de Kock in there. There's no Markram in there. There's, Faf in his own way was confrontational, just body language.
Yeah.
Nothing else. Like, yes, I've got a mint while I make 100. So what? That offends people. But there's a lot of nice guys in that South African top order. But nice guys don't necessarily take on bullies. They're nice guys. Someone's gonna have to have a bit of mongrel and, even sledge them, ahead. I can't say who. Rassie van der Dussen, maybe. But he's also been injured for the last while, so he hasn't really had much time. You're gonna have to have the series of his life. Really, really the series of his life, like you said.
You were thinking of Sarda Levere, weren't you? He is just far too much of a gentleman to go and open the batting in Australia.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we used to play club cricket with him. There'd be 10 guys sledging you, and Cyril quietly standing at the gully just looking down, because it's just not in his nature. It's just not in his nature. He'll talk with the bat, but he's never ever going to get into a confrontation. It's just not him, you know. So why would he start Boxing Day at the MCG with 90,000 Australians screaming their heads off? It's just very unlikely.
It is. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we'll talk about the middle order and the bowlers.
If you love the language of cricket and want more, then head over to the 99.94 app and you can hear all of our podcasts and cricket commentary. We're adding new shows all the time and covering cricket series from all over the world. Be the first to hear all of our announcements by following us on social media at 9994DM. Welcome to Cricket's Conversation.
All right, Zams, we've been talking about players having career-defining series. Marco Jansen has made an astonishing start to his Test career, really. You know, he is batting probably a place too high at number 7. I presume that he will bat at 7 again. That's if the wicketkeeper Kyle Verreynne bats at number 6. I don't know whether you agree with that. Verreynne 6, Jansen 7, Keshav Maharaj 8, or Simon Harmer. You know, again, Simon Harmer just in the second round of 4-day cricket a couple of weeks ago took 14 wickets. Again, he does it all the time for Essex. But Dean Elgar has said over and over again, Keshav is my number 1. And, you know, that's like non-negotiable. Absolutely, de facto, he is my number 1 spinner. And he has complete and total faith in him. I wonder whether that might be revisited. I mean, Harmer is a prolific wicket taker and has been for 10 years, whoever he's playing for. And then Anrich Nortje could have a massive, massive impact in Australia. He's going to enjoy the pace of those pitches. He had a fabulous T20 World Cup. I don't know how much relevance that is, but it was in Australia. And then I think a lot will depend on also the fitness of Lungi Ngidi.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential in that second half of the South African team, but there's obviously a lot of inexperience, particularly Test experience in Australia. Kagiso Rabada did almost single-handedly win that Test when Dale Steyn broke down midway through. You know, he bowled out of his boots. I still remember the ball he bowled to Usman Khawaja. Unbelievable. So, you know, there's potential for sure. But you need your bowling attack to be, you know, in unison. You can't have Rabada going for nothing and Nortje flying at 8, 9 and over because the pressure gets released. To answer your Kesh question, he has proven himself in all conditions all around the world, and there's more than just loyalty. There's a trust there which has been developed, and you know he's one of the leaders in that team. So I would suspect, barring injury, the only way that Harmer gets into that team is playing alongside Kesh in Sydney. That's just the way it is. Kesh is probably a bit more trusted with the bat as well, and he's a lot less attacking. He's somewhere in between what Paul Harris gave and what maybe Claude Henderson did. He can just tie up an end and he's happy to play boring cricket, whereas Harmer takes a lot of wickets because he's aggressive. He bowls with the mentality of a fast bowler. But if you're attacking and it's not coming off, you know, it's kind of the problem that we had with Imran Tahir all those years ago when they're trying to make him a Test cricketer because he had wicket-taking potential. When it goes wrong, you just travel for a lot of runs and a captain doesn't know what to do with you because you've only got one mindset, I need to take wickets. Kesh can bowl 60 overs and just be happy to concede 100 runs. Harmer feels the need that he's got to take wickets in order to be effective, and maybe that's they feel that they've got enough attacking impetus with all the pace bowling options that they have, that if Kesh doesn't take wickets, he's still effective. I don't think Simon Harmer would consider himself effective if he's not striking.
So in the great tradition of Australian left-arm fast bowlers, Mitch Johnson, Mitchell Starc, it's a great tradition. I've named 2. But Marco Jansen is, for those who might be watching or listening to this who aren't familiar with him, he's 6'8", over 2 meters in modern money, and my goodness me, he gets bounce. I mean, he would have got bounce in Rawalpindi, I reckon. But at the Gabba, and certainly at the MCG on those drop-in pitches, he could play a big. If South Africa can score 300, I think he could really, really be a handful, even for Labuschagne and Smith.
Well, they have to score 300 as a minimum because Labuschagne and Smith will score 300 between themselves. So to have any chance in the game, you do have to score and start at 300. But yeah, we spoke about a South African who's got that confrontational nature about him. If you think about it, outside of Kagiso Rabada, Marco Jansen, when he played against India and he kept on consistently having a go at Bumrah and anyone else who wanted to have a word, he's not shy. He's definitely not going to shirk.
He is off the field.
Well, white line fever, whatever you want to call it. You can be a nice guy off the field. That's great. Floyd Mayweather's a nice guy away from the ring, but everything in between, he's an absolute prick to the eye. But that's great because he riles up the opposition and then he gets and does his job done. So you do need to have that mongrel. And the one thing that we can all agree on is Marco Jansen has that. We said the South African team lost something when they dropped him in England because he had played very well in the first test at Lords and they lost something and they never got it back when he wasn't playing in the second one. So, you look forward to seeing what he does in Australia in not just on those pitches, but in that din of 40, 50,000 people every day because that takes some getting used to. You don't get that in South Africa. He's just come from playing in front of 10 people. He's had a bit of it in the IPL, but that's just a party. There's the constant noise. Here, it's very personally centered around you as you pop up on the big screen. People boo you, start having a word, and they zoom into your face. People boo you. You go down to fine leg, and people call you all sorts. It's going to be an interesting challenge, but I'm sure he's looking forward to it.
Yeah, no doubt. There's no question about that. There's only 3 of this current squad who've actually toured Australia before. The captain, Dean Elgar's been on 2 tours. Temba Bavuma, Keshav Maharaj. Oh, no, 4, sorry. And Kagiso Rabada,
Yeah.
there's 4. Yeah, 4 of them. And hopefully they will be able to pass on that experience. Anyway, I'll be there and I'll be talking to you on an ongoing basis, and we'll be hopefully podding at least twice a week. But thank you for now for listening to South Africa on 99.94, where we speak cricket, not quite every day, but as I said, at least twice a week. Do please rate, review and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can download the 99.94 app and follow us on Twitter at Neil Manthorpe and at Wanzam17. That's all for now. Chat again soon.